Is my screen visible? Can you see my screen? Is my screen visible?
Yes, ma'am, it's visible now.
Okay.
Visible.
So in case when I ask question, one of you can unmute and answer, okay?
Okay, ma'am.
Okay. So very good evening to all of you. I'm Dr. Gunapriya Raghunath, Professor and HOD of Anatomy, Savita Medical College. First of all, I would like to send my warm wishes to all of you from KMC because I was also one of you like this in 1985 as a very enthusiastic and anxious first year student. Right away, some 35 years back in 1985, long back. So it gives me real lot of excitement and thrill to handle a session for students who are from my own alma mater. So it's with great joy I'm doing this session for all of you. In case you have any difficulties, please do not hesitate to approach me to clarify your doubts anytime, even during session or after the session. You can mail me or WhatsApp me. So am I audible now so far? No issues?
Yes,
Shall I
ma'am.
continue? Okay, fine, yeah. So in neuroanatomy, today we are going to discuss about medulla oblongata. So we'll just see a question now. It's a clinical case-based problem. A person following irregular medication for chronic high BP was brought to the hospital with the complaints of inability to move his limbs on one side, with loss of sensation on one side of the body as well, same side as the motor inability, and unable to move his tongue to one side but opposite to the side of motor inability and sensory loss. The patient had high BP for a chronic period, not on proper medication, and he had motor inability and sensory inability or sensory loss on one side and the tongue deviation on the other side. So identify the lesion. We don't know anything about this topic now. We're just seeing what the questions could be likely. Identify the lesion. What could be the reason for this condition? What are the reasons for the clinical presentation in this patient? Why all this symptomatology or clinical presentation he is suffering from? So what are the individual reasons for these symptoms that we see in the patient? So the objectives of this session will be, at the end of this session, the student must be able to describe the external features, internal features, blood supply, and clinical anatomy of medulla oblongata. So the brainstem consists of the following parts. From lower down, you have the medulla followed by pons and then the midbrain. All these three are the constituent parts of the brainstem. It's like a stalk. That's why we call it as a stem. Any flower or a fruit has a stem. So the brain also has a stem on which the brain is resting upon, or it's being supported by its own stem. That stem is a brain stem, which is made up of three components. From below upwards, we label or name the three parts as medulla oblongata, pons, and midbrain. This stalk-like brainstem connects the spinal cord with the forebrain. In general, coming to the functions of brainstem, it acts as a passage for the tracts. You must have studied spinal cord in detail actually. So you have ascending tracts, which are the sensory tracts, and descending tracts, which are the motor tracts. So this brainstem acts as a passage or as a medium for the passage of ascending and descending tracts. It acts as an autonomic reflex control centers for vasomotor control, cardiac and vasomotor control, and respiratory control. It's also the seat of the nuclei of the last 10 cranial nerves. But for the olfactory nerve and optic nerve, all the other cranial nerves from the third cranial nerve to the 12th cranial nerve, all of them have their nuclei in some subdivision of the brainstem, either in the midbrain or the pons or the medulla oblongata, except 1 and 2 cranial nerves. All the other cranial nerves have their nuclei seated in some or the other subdivision of brainstem. So in this picture, you can make out this is the entire brain. And from here to here, what you have is the brainstem, the medulla oblongata, the pons, and the midbrain. Now moving on to the session today, that is medulla oblongata. It is directed upwards as a continuation from the spinal cord. It's directed upwards as a continuation from the spinal cord, from the foramen magnum up to the lower border of the pons. Up to the lower border of the pons. This is midbrain, pons, and medulla. So medulla oblongata extends from the spinal cord upwards from the foramen magnum up to the lower border of the pons. The lowest part of the brainstem lies in the posterior cranial fossa, vertically between the clivus. We call a bony, slopy area in the posterior cranial fossa, known as clivus, and vallicula of cerebellum. It's a truncated cone which resembles a bulb. The truncated cone, the medulla oblongata, resembles a bulb like a truncated cone. That's why it's known as medulla. The word medulla oblongata refers to a truncated cone which appears like a bulb. It has vital centers like cardiac, vasomotor, and respiratory centers. It has several vital centers like cardiac, vasomotor, and respiratory centers, and also gives attachment to the last 4 cranial nerves, 9, 10, 11, 12 cranial nerves. The central canal also is seen in the lower part. Above, it opens into the lower part of the 4th ventricle. Central canal, which you find in the spinal cord, continues throughout half of the medulla oblongata. In the upper part of medulla oblongata, it opens into the cavity of the floor of the cavity of the 4th ventricle. So that is in general about the medulla oblongata. Now coming to external features, we'll do the external features on the ventral side, on the dorsal side, then we'll go into the internal features in the form of cross sections or transverse sections of medulla oblongata. Am I okay till now? Is it okay to follow me?
Yes, ma'am.
1 second. Please give me 1 second. ஐயோ கிளாஸ் எடுத்துட்டு நான் இப்போ ஆன்லைன் கிளாஸ் வேண்டு வர அதுல இருந்து பிரேக் கொடுப்பாரு அதான் டோர் தரக்க முடியல பேசுற சவுண்ட் உங்களுக்கு கேட்டிருக்கோம் நான் கால் இல்ல ஐ அம் டாக்கிங் கிளாஸ் போயிட்டு இருக்கு Am I audible now? Sorry for the interruption. I had a patient.
Yes, ma'am.
Hello. It's audible, no? Shall I continue?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So coming to external features, we'll do the ventral surface first and then the dorsal surface. So the anteromedian fissure, we have a fissure on the anterior side known as the anteromedian fissure. So this is the anteromedian fissure. Likewise, you have one on the posterior aspect known as posteromedian sulcus, which divide the medulla into 2 halves, a right half and a left half. So on the anterior or ventral aspect, we have an anteromedian fissure, and on the posterior aspect, we have posteromedian sulcus, which help to divide the medulla into a right half and a left half. We are seeing the picture like this, but for this person or patient in front of us, this is the right side medulla, and this is the not right side, right half of medulla. This is the left half of medulla. The anteromedian fissure continues from the spinal cord. If you take the spinal cord, it continues from the spinal cord and ends in a small depression or a recess at the lower border of the pons known as foramen cecum. Now this foramen cecum term must be familiar to you because you would have studied in tongue also. The 2 limbs of sulcus terminalis come and meet at a particular point known as foramen cecum, from where the thyroglossal duct also starts to develop. So that's one foramen cecum. Then, in relation to the crista galli and frontal crest, between the crista galli and frontal crest in the anterior cranial fossa, you will find another small foramen known as foramen cecum, which, if present, can transmit nasal emissary vein. So that's also a foramen cecum. So you should know all these sites where you find foramen cecum. One is the uppermost end of the anteromedian fissure, You have one in the tongue, where the 2 limbs of sulcus terminalis meet. You have one in the anterior cranial fossa at the junction between the frontal crest and the crista galli. So now this anteromedian fissure, lower down if you see, it is interrupted in the lower part by the crossing fibers of pyramidal decussation. by the fibers of pyramidal tract that cross from one side to other side. They cross like this. So that crossing is known as decussation. Decussating means crossing from one side to other side. Fibers coming down from one side will cross the midline, go to the other side. From this side will cross the midline, go to this side. Excuse me, sorry for that. So these decussating fibers will be seen at the lower end of anteromedian fissure. Now moving on to posteromedian. So you can make out here, this is a posteromedian sulcus. Posteromedian sulcus continues from the spinal cord. Like the anteromedian fissure, posteromedian sulcus also continues from spinal cord, and above it diverges to form the boundaries of fourth ventricle. So you can make out the cavity of the fourth ventricle here. So posteromedian sulcus runs above and opens into the cavity of the fourth ventricle to form the boundaries of the fourth ventricle. Apart from these, you also have anterolateral sulcus and a posterolateral sulcus. So this is anteromedian fissure. Take it clearly from me. This is anteromedian fissure on the ventral aspect. This is anterolateral sulcus on the ventral aspect. And as you keep traveling laterally, this is posterolateral sulcus. On the dorsal aspect or posterior aspect, this is posteromedian sulcus. Posteromedian sulcus. Now, there are certain important nerves emerging, and there are some important structures or features of medulla seen as well. So, this is anteromedian fissure, anterolateral sulcus. In between what you find, this region is known as a pyramid. It is known as a pyramid. So, this pyramid on its lateral aspect, along the anterolateral sulcus, you have the emergence of the rootlets of hypoglossal nerve. You have the emergence of the rootlets of hypoglossal nerve. Followed by, you have the olive. Between the anterolateral sulcus and the posterolateral sulcus, you have the olive, a small elevation. The underlying structure there is the inferior olivary nucleus. And beyond the olive, through the posterolateral sulcus, you have the emergence of rootlets of 9, 10, 11 cranial nerves. 9, 10, 11 cranial nerves. Now going back to these fissures and sulci once again, just to go for a recap now. On the ventral aspect of the medulla oblongata, in the midline you find anteromedian fissure. It's a continuation from the same fissure from the spinal cord. It goes up to the lower border of the pons, ends as a small depressed area known as foramen caecum. The same name we find in tongue and anterior cranial fossa, but they are totally different. They have no connection with this foramen caecum. It is just that the human body has got foramen caecum named structures in 3 different parts of the human body, because examiners can ask you this in viva voce. And then you have on the posterior aspect, the posteromedian sulcus, which goes up and opens into the cavity of the fourth ventricle. Coming back to the ventral surface, once again, you have anterolateral sulcus, posterolateral sulcus. Between the anteromedian fissure and the anterolateral sulcus, you have the pyramid. Between the anterolateral sulcus and the posterolateral sulcus, you have the olive. So pyramid is formed by pyramidal tract fibers. Olive is formed by inferior olivary nucleus. We will study all of it now in the subsequent slides. And along the anterolateral sulcus, we have the emergence of rootlets of hypoglossal nerve. Along the posterolateral sulcus, we have the emergence of the rootlets of 9, glossopharyngeal, 10, vagus, and your accessory nerve, cranial part of the accessory nerve. So all these are emerging from the posterolateral sulcus. Now moving on to ventral, the features of the ventral surface of the medulla. Further features, what are there? So I told you pyramid. Pyramid is there here. This pyramid is seen one on each side. It is produced by corticospinal tract. It is seen on either side of anteromedian fissure, being produced by the underlying corticospinal tract, or otherwise known as pyramidal tract. So these pyramidal tract fibers are motor fibers. So these motor fibers have originated right from the primary motor area. They come down as corona radiator to internal capsule. From internal capsule, they descend into the midbrain. Midbrain to pons, all as corticospinal fibers. They reach pons. From pons, they come to medulla. From medulla, they'll go to spinal cord. And from spinal cord, they will emerge as spinal nerves and go to the respective motor system muscles to supply the motor innervation to the muscles concerned. So that is a role played by the pyramidal tract fibers. Now, out of these pyramidal tract fibers, 75% of fibers cross and descend as lateral corticospinal tract. I think you must have studied this in physiology, spinal cord tracts as well. 75% fibers of pyramidal tract will cross and go to the opposite side as lateral corticospinal tract. Whereas 20% fibers will descend, they do not cross, they descend on the same side as anterior corticospinal tract, which means you have two sets of corticospinal tract, anterior and lateral. Anterior is formed by the same side pyramidal tract fibers, lateral is formed by the opposite side pyramidal tract fibers. And the lateral corticospinal tract contributes to 75%, the cross fibers, and the anterior corticospinal tract is contributed by 20% uncrossed fibers. Apart from this, now you will understand 75% plus 20, it contributes to 95% only. So remaining 5%. Remaining 5% fibers will run downwards along with the uncrossed fibers in the lateral part of the white matter or lateral part of the white column of spinal cord. So this is how all these external features will appear like in medulla oblongata. Now moving on to further features, apart from pyramid, we're moving on to the olive now. So olive is produced by a gray matter body known as inferior olivary nucleus. So inferior olivary nucleus has connections with the cerebellum to smoothen the functions of cerebellum. Cerebellum is mainly for body balance and for highly coordinated skilled activities and all. So those kind of functions are made better by the connections given by the inferior olivary nucleus with the cerebellum. Apart from this, you also have the rootlets of 12th nerve emerging between or just medial to the olive or between the pyramid and the olive. You have the rootlets of hypoglossal nerve emerging. Then you have the inferior cerebellar peduncle in this region. It's not marked here in the picture. Inferior cerebellar peduncle here. Inferior cerebellar peduncle connects the medulla with the cerebellum. Same side cerebellum. Inferior cerebellar peduncle. Then you have three sets of cerebellar peduncles. Superior, middle and inferior. Superior connects midbrain with the cerebellum. Middle connects pons with the cerebellum. And inferior connects the medulla oblongata with the cerebellum. So cerebellar peduncles are meant to connect the three subdivisions of brainstem with the cerebellum of that side, cerebellar hemisphere of that side. So you have inferior cerebellar peduncle here, which connects the medulla oblongata with the cerebellum of the same side. So rootlets of the 9, 10, which I mentioned earlier, rootlets of 9, 10, 11 cranial nerves also emerge through posterolateral sulcus between olive and inferior cerebellar peduncle in this region. Now we are moving on to the dorsal side or the posterior surface of medulla. So posterior surface of medulla, the lower part is closed where you have a central canal. The central canal of the spinal cord is continuing into the lower part of medulla as the same central canal. And that's why we say this is a closed part of the medulla and the upper part is said to be the open part of the medulla. So this is the closed part of medulla. This is the open part of the medulla. Now in the closed part, what all will you see? You find some bundles in the form of fasciculi. The word fasciculus refers to bundle. Fasciculus means bundle of fibers. So you have fasciculus gracilis here medially and fasciculus cuneatus here. So fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus cuneatus and also inferior cerebellar peduncle, which is labeled here in this picture. So these fasciculi, what we call bundles, they will go and end somewhere. So they end in tubercles, respective tubercles. Fasciculus gracilis will end in gracile tubercle. Fasciculus cuneatus will end in cuneate tubercle. And these tubercles contain their respective nuclei. So fasciculus gracilis will end in gracile tubercle and fasciculus cuneatus will end in cuneate tubercle. And within these tubercles, you have the same named nuclei, gracile nucleus and cuneate nucleus. All these are concerned with the fibers that are carrying the sensations, the proprioception, all those sensations from the various parts of the body to the higher sensory centers in cerebral cortex. We'll be seeing that later. Tuber cinereum is a small part that you see here in close relation to these two fasciculi, and this is formed by the spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve. Spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve. So, in the closed part of the medulla oblongata on its dorsal side, we see fasciculus gracilis ending in gracile tubercle, fasciculus cuneatus ending in cuneate tubercle. These two tubercles contain the respective nuclei concerned with the sensory pathway to the higher centers in the brain, followed by tuber cinereum, which is a part of the spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve, and followed by inferior cerebellar peduncle. So these are features of the closed part of the dorsal surface of medulla. Coming to open part, the open part goes to form the floor of the fourth ventricle. It forms the lower part of the floor of the fourth ventricle. The upper part will be formed by the similar dorsal surface of pons. So this is pons. In between, you have the stria medullaris dividing the fourth ventricle cavity into a pontine part and a medullary part. So this lower medullary part is formed by the dorsal surface of medulla oblongata, the open part of the dorsal surface of medulla oblongata. So whatever I'm showing here is referring to this boundary of the fourth ventricle floor like this. Okay, what was closed? What you saw as a closed canal below comes up and opens out like this. So now moving on to internal structure. So what we have done so far is the external features. Now we are what we see on the outer aspect of the medulla oblongata. Now we are going to take a cross section and see it under the 4x magnification, or you see it under dissection microscope, not under the compound microscope, just see it under dissection microscope. So just like spinal cord, you'll find gray matter and white matter distribution here also. So you'll find white matter and a central gray matter also. So white matter is there outside, gray matter is there like spinal cord. It's looking almost similar to spinal cord because we are in the lower part of the medulla. And there's a central canal also, just like spinal cord. The gray matter is broken up into into many nuclear masses. You can see some extension here, something here, something here, something here, and here one big anterior horn is there. So the gray matter is broken up into nuclear masses. At the level of pyramidal decussation, at the level of sensory decussation, at the level of olivary nuclei, this is how we are going to study the internal structure of medulla. So internal structure of medulla, in general, you can make out a gray matter distribution, the form of small nuclear masses broken up, and you have a white matter distribution in the form of bundles of tracts. All these are tracts, bundles of tracts. White matter fiber means bundles of tracts. Gray matter means collections or aggregations of cell bodies of neurons. So that's what we mean by gray matter. Basically, gray matter means collections of cell bodies of neurons, and white matter means the axonal fibers forming the nerve tracts. And this internal structure of medulla will be studied from below upwards at 3 levels. The lowest level is your level at the pyramidal decussation, then followed by sensory decussation. Close to pons, you have your inferior olivary nucleus. So now we're going to go into details of transverse section of medulla at the pyramidal decussation level. So if you look at this picture, it looks almost like the spinal cord. The cross section looks what I told you in the earlier slide. It looks almost like the spinal cord. Nucleus gracilis is seen there. We saw the fasciculus on the external features. We saw the fasciculus gracilis coming and ending in fasciculus gracilis ending in gracile tubercle. The gracile tubercle internally, this tubercle is on the outer surface. It's on the outer surface. Inside it is made up of the corresponding nucleus. So the gracile tubercle contains nucleus gracilis inside. The cuneate tubercle contains the nucleus cuneatus inside. So nucleus gracilis and nucleus cuneatus are seen here as small, narrow, strip-like projections. This is the anterior horn. This is the anterior horn or anterior gray horn. This is the posterior gray horn. These two are small, narrow, strip-like extensions known as nucleus gracilis and nucleus cuneatus. The apex of posterior horn shows a small bulge or slightly swollen, and that is formed by the spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve. Spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve, which is nothing but the upward continuation of substantia gelatinosa. So substantia gelatinosa of spinal cord is concerned with carrying the sensations from the body, from the one side of the body upwards to the higher cortical centers in the cerebral cortex. So what you see here will be, again, you find the gray matter and the white matter outside. And in the gray matter, you find small collections. And behind this anterior gray horn, posterior gray horn, and just medial to the posterior gray horn, you find 2 narrow strips, the nucleus gracilis, nucleus cuneatus. And the posterior gray horn at its tip shows a small bulge formed by the spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve. And this spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve is capped by another structure known as the spinal tract of trigeminal nerve. And all these are concerned with carrying the sensations from the face. Trigeminal nerve, we are saying trigeminal nerve. It's going to carry, posterior horn is concerned with carrying your sensations from the body, and especially this spinal tract of trigeminal nerve and spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve are concerned with the carrying of sensations from the face, because it is trigeminal nerve which carries the cutaneous sensations from the region of face. So you remember all this from the gray matter here. Now we're moving on to the white matter. So white matter obviously means your tracts, your bundles of nerve fibers, axonal fibers, or tracts. So here the most important tract that we study will be decussation. Decussation of pyramidal tracts. It's the most important feature at this level. And crossing occurs here. So that's why we studied this level as level at pyramidal decussation. Pyramidal decussation level. Transverse section taken at pyramidal decussation level. So here the fibers are crossing from one side. 75% I told you cross to opposite side. And these crossed fibers will go to form lateral corticospinal tract. The uncrossed fibers will go to form the anterior corticospinal tract. That is 20%. And the 5% which do not cross will continue in the lateral part of the white matter or white column. Now this crossing, decussation, detaches the anterior horn from the rest of the central gray matter. This is the anterior horn. This anterior gray horn, by these crossing fibers, completely detaches the anterior gray horn from this central part of the gray matter. So all this is lengthwise happening, coming down and crossing and going down. So it's a continuous thing coming down from the cerebral cortex up to spinal cord till they come out as the spinal nerves from the from the sides of the spinal cord. They emerge as spinal nerves. So most important white matter feature here is the decussation of pyramidal tracts, and which detaches the anterior gray horn from the rest of the gray matter, central gray matter. The detached anterior gray horn divides into spinal nucleus of accessory nerve. Don't confuse with trigeminal nerve. This is spinal nucleus of accessory nerve, and supraspinal nucleus of first cervical nerve. Now, why do we call these as spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve, spinal nucleus of accessory nerve? Because the spinal nucleus of accessory nerve is your 11th cranial nerve. Accessory nerve is your 11th cranial nerve, which has two components, a cranial accessory component and a spinal accessory component. So why do you think they've named it that way? The cranial accessory component has its origin from the brain, and the spinal accessory component has its origin from the spinal cord, from the upper 5 cervical segments of spinal cord, which we're going to study now. So that's why these two then join together in the jugular foramen and come out of jugular foramen as a combined accessory nerve. And once again, they part ways. They come like Reilsnehem, like train friendship. They come together. One is coming from spinal cord, goes into the spinal accessory nerve, is the content of foramen magnum. You should remember that. It gains access into posterior cranial fossa, and already their cranial accessory nerve is there, close to foramen magnum. Both unite together. Unite means they do not blend or merge completely. They just go close to each other, travel through jugular foramen uniformly, unitedly, and come out and part ways once again. Spinal accessory nerve goes to posterior triangle to supply the sternocleidomastoid muscle and the trapezius, and the cranial accessory nerve will go to the region of pharynx to supply the muscles of pharynx and soft palate. So that's how the spinal accessory, the accessory nerve is formed. And here that spinal component, so this is the detached anterior horn, which goes to form the spinal nucleus of the accessory nerve and supraspinal nucleus of first cervical nerve. You may wonder why first cervical nerve. First cervical nerve is a spinal nerve. It should take origin from spinal cord, from the first spinal cord segment or from the first spinal segment of spinal cord. Why is it taking origin from the medulla? It has a higher representation in the medulla. So in addition to having an origin from the first spinal segment, it also has a small origin coming from the detached anterior horn of medulla. So detached anterior horn of medulla, remember two things are taking origin, spinal nucleus of accessory nerve and supraspinal nucleus of first cervical nerve. And then you also have hypoglossal nucleus. We studied this because the nerve roots are emerging from the anterolateral sulcus of the medulla oblongata. So obviously that cranial nerve should have its nucleus in the medulla only. So you find my hypoglossal nucleus also here. Then you have nucleus of accessory nerve extends up to what we study here, spinal accessory nucleus. So that extends from the medulla, anterior detached horn. It goes down up to the spinal cord segments, first upper 5 cervical segments of spinal cord. So it takes origin from the medulla and then goes down to upper 5 segments of spinal cord or upper 5 cervical segments of spinal cord. That's why it is known as the spinal part of accessory nerve or spinal component of accessory nerve. The supraspinal nucleus of first cervical nerve gives efferent fibers to first cervical nerve. First cervical nerve is the very first spinal nerve, very first spinal nerve arising. And so this supraspinal nucleus gives rise to the motor fibers to first cervical nerve, and it is continuous above with the 12th nerve nucleus. Now you should understand one thing. I think head and neck would have been over for you before lockdown. This hypoglossal nerve and first cervical nerve are very close friends. You can call them as very thick friends because they are together from the site of origin, the way they come out of the cranial cavity, the way they travel to this region, to the digastric triangle, everywhere they are very close, very thick friends there, they go together always. So hypoglossal nucleus is there in the medulla, and the supraspinal nucleus of first cervical nerve is also there in the medulla. When you come out to the region of digastric triangle and you come down to carotid sheath, on the anterior surface of carotid sheath, you would have studied a nerve loop known as ansa cervicalis. Ansa cervicalis is a nerve loop that is meant to supply the strap muscles of the neck, like your sternothyroid, sternohyoid, geniohyoid, thyrohyoid. All these strap muscles are supplied by the branches given off from a nerve loop lying on the anterior surface of carotid sheath known as ansa cervicalis. This ansa cervicalis is further made up of two components. One is your ansa descendens hypoglossae, and one is your descendens cervicalis. We'll forget the descendens cervicalis for time being. The descendens hypoglossae is formed by C1 nerve, the first cervical nerve. It is formed by first cervical nerve. Then why do we call it as descendens hypoglossae? Because this C1 nerve travels closely along with the hypoglossal nerve, and the site where the hypoglossal nerve deviates to supply the tongue, it then runs down on the carotid sheath to complete the loop of ansa cervicalis. So ansa cervicalis has two components, descendens hypoglossae and descendens cervicalis. This descendens hypoglossae is formed by C1, your cervical nerve, first cervical nerve, or C1 nerve, which all along travels from the medulla up to the area close to tongue, where the hypoglossal nerve will deviate and go to the tongue to supply muscles of tongue, and C1 nerve fiber will come down and complete the loop of ansa cervicalis. And this C1 nerve fiber will supply two muscles, thyrohyoid and geniohyoid. You can go back and refer to your head and neck textbook. C1 fiber will supply two muscles, two strap muscles, geniohyoid and thyrohyoid directly, not from the loop, it is directly from C1 fibers. And that's why this, friendship, this thick friendship is not only here outside the cranial cavity, it is starting from the site of origin. That's why I'm mentioning so much to you, so that in case it is asked in Viva anywhere or if it's asked in MCQ, if you have MCQ, it will be easy for you to answer these questions, because hypoglossal nucleus and the supraspinal nucleus of first cervical nerve are closely related in the medulla itself. Only then they come out and then they part ways and go down to each one's own destination or the region desired. Now moving on to the next level, the transverse section of the next level, that is sensory deposition level. So we have seen so far, I think before this, anyone wants a recap of pyramidal deposition level? Do you want me to do a recap? Someone can unmute and tell me, or shall I continue with sensory deposition? Can anyone tell me, please?
Yes, ma'am, we need a recap.
Hello? Can anyone unmute and tell me, please? Shall I continue?
Recap, ma'am.
Is it audible what I'm saying?
Yes, ma'am.
Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am. Would you please recap, ma'am?
Okay. I'll do a recap then. Yes, fine. Sure, I'll do that. Yes. So this is a recap. You can see how it looks like. This is a gray matter, anterior gray horn, posterior gray horn, and some narrow strip-like projections forming nucleus gracilis, nucleus cuneatus. This is posterior gray horn. Its end is bulging, showing a small bulb-like projection or swelling, and that is formed by the spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve carrying sensations from face. It's an upward continuation of substantia gelatinosa coming from the spinal cord. It is capped by the spinal tract of trigeminal nerve, which is also concerned with the carrying of sensations from the face. Followed by the white matter part of the pyramidal decussation level. Here you have the decussation of pyramidal tracts. 75% will cross and go to the opposite side in the form of lateral corticospinal tract. 20% will descend on the same side as anterior corticospinal tract, and only 5% will descend on the same side without crossing in the lateral part of the white matter. So that's about the most important feature in this level. That's your decussation of pyramidal tracts, most important feature. That's why it is called so, pyramidal decussation level. So then you have the detached anterior horn will give rise to what all? It gives rise to spinal nucleus of accessory nerve, supraspinal nucleus of first cervical nerve. Then you have your hypoglossal nerve. And I told you how the hypoglossal nucleus and C1 nucleus are closely connected with each other, right in their site of origin in the medulla oblongata. And that is how they also have a close connection outside here, the digastric triangle. The hypoglossal nerve and the C1 fibers will travel close to each other. The hypoglossal nerve close to tongue will go to supply the tongue muscles, and then the C1 will descend downwards. The C1 is forming the descendens hypoglossate component of ansa cervicalis. It directly supplies thyroid and genohyoid muscles. So I think now I'll move on to the transverse section medulla at the level of sensory decussation. So we saw something called pyramidal decussation or motor decussation. So we have some sensory fibers also crossing and going to opposite side, and that's why, which is happening here at this level, at the middle part of medulla. That's why we call this as sensory decussation level. So here we already studied that close to midline on the posterior aspect, we had nucleus gracilis. You see the previous picture, how it appeared, and you see the next level. One step above, if you go, it appears like this, broken up nuclei. Nucleus gracilis, nucleus cuneatus. So both these appear separate from central gray matter. In the previous picture, at a lower level, if you see, they were all merged together. Central gray matter, they were merged here. At just one step above, they have detached, they are looking like individual separate nuclear masses. So the one medial is nucleus gracilis. The fasciculus gracilis has brought in the sensory fibers from the various parts of body and dropped it here. Similarly, the fasciculus cuneatus has brought all the sensory fibers from various parts of body and dropped it here. And these are nucleus gracilis and nucleus cuneatus. Why we say nucleus? Because these are cell bodies of neurons, and here a fresh set of axons are going to commence, known as second order neurons. So you would have studied in sensory tracts or in ascending tracts as first order neuron, second order neuron, third order neuron. It's nothing big to understand these terminologies. We know a relay race, isn't it? In school, most of you would have run in a relay race. So in a relay race, there are 3 or 4 students running, and each one passes on the baton. When her turn or his turn is over, they pass on the baton to the next person. So the final person will go to the winning line, to touch the winning line and to win the game for the team, isn't it? So the baton is being passed on, and there are 3 or 4 contestants or runners going there. So that is exactly the first order neuron, second order neuron, third order neuron. First order neuron carries the initial sensations from the parts of the body to this level and leaves it at the nucleus gracilis and nucleus cuneatus. From here, the second order neurons will carry the information to the thalamus. From thalamus, third order neurons will carry the information to the higher cortical sensory centers, the primary sensory area in the cerebral cortex. So this is how the information is carried on from the various parts of the body. Sensations are carried on from various parts of the body to these nuclei gracilis and cuneatus, from here to the thalamic nuclei, from there to the primary sensory cortex. So just by the way, I just deviated a bit to explain to you how the order of neurons are functioning. So nucleus gracilis and nucleus cuneatus appear separated from the central gray matter. Fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus cuneatus will be ending in these nuclei. I just mentioned to you that those bundles will come and end here. So those bundles form first order neurons. The neurons that are going to arise from here, which are going down and forming these arcuate fibers, these will form the second order neurons, which we are going to see in the next slide. So the internal arcuate fibers. Now these terms, if you understand their meaning, it's very easy. In whole of medicine, you need to understand. There's no reason to mug up anything. You just need to understand the terminologies, their meanings. So it's very easy to keep in your memory. So internal arcuate fibers. So what do we mean by internal arcuate fibers? Internal, something is inside the medulla. Arcuate, something is forming an arch. So can you make out an arch here? There is an arch formed here, isn't it? So there is an arc or arched formed here. Arc or arch formed here. So fibers, of course, made up of white matter fibers, or you have, sorry, I think there is, I don't know, I made some, this thing and it's become like this. I did something else. Okay, no problem. So internal arcuate fibers arise from the nucleus gracilis and nucleus cuneatus as a second order neurons, and they will run forwards and medially, cross and go to the opposite side, and they will ascend further. They cross, go to the opposite side, and then climb further towards the upper part of medulla and pons and midbrain in the form of a new bundle known as medial lemniscus. Medial lemniscus carry the sensations of touch, position, vibration senses on the opposite side of the body. That's why I kept on telling touch, position, vibration, all these will be mostly your proprioception, tactile and proprioception, joint sense, position sense, vibration sense, what's happening to our muscle, what's happening to our joint, in which position it is. Unless you have proprioception, like even now I'm sitting and talking to you, I can't be stuck to the sofa like this. I need to keep moving my upper limb or lower limb, some kind of movement I need to do to make myself sit comfortably. So I can't be always sitting throughout. So that sensation which tells your brain about the position of your body, whether any alteration or modification is required in the body. Please kindly bear with me. I don't know how these things came. I'm not sure. Just by touching here, these arrows came up. I'm not very sure. It's a laser pointer only. Okay. So medial lemniscus carrying touch, position, not pain and temperature and all. That's by spinothalamic tract. You would have studied in physiology. So medial lemniscus carries touch and proprioception, position and vibration sense from the opposite side of the body. Why opposite side? Because it is crossing and going to the opposite side. Like pyramidal decussation, corticospinal fibers, these fibers also cross and go to the opposite side of the body. So gracile fibers, the gracile fibers will bring in the medial fiber, will be lying medial, and the cuneate fibers will be lying lateral within the medial lemniscus. So what is medial lemniscus made up of? It is made up of sensory fibers consisting of touch, position and vibration senses from the opposite side of the body, with the fibers coming from the gracile nucleus being medial in position and the fibers coming from the cuneate nucleus being lateral in position, and these are second order neurons. So they have originated from these nuclei. They've traveled anteriorly, and they cross the midline and they're going to ascend as medial lemniscus. That's why this level is known as sensory decussation level. Now these internal arcuate fibers, that you see here, they separate out the spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve or the spinal tract of trigeminal nerve from the central gray matter. So in between they are lying. So this is the spinal nucleus and tract of trigeminal nerve, which is totally detached from the central gray matter. The central gray matter was appearing totally different, all blended, merged together in the pyramidal decussation level. If you see here, everything was merged together. This was spinal nucleus and tract of trigeminal nerve, all merged together with the central gray matter. But later, as you keep going above the level of the medulla oblongata, the upper levels, it's going to appear like this. Okay. So now, from the nucleus gracilis and cuneatus, fibers from the nucleus gracilis and cuneatus will cross so that the fibers of head will be lying posteriorly. This is anterior aspect. This is posterior aspect. So fibers from the head will be lying posteriorly, and fibers from the lower limbs will be lying anteriorly within the medial lemniscus. And the medial lemniscus relays in the thalamus, which is a sensory relay station. So this carrying second order neurons, what I mentioned to you earlier. The accessory cuneate nucleus, you can make out here. It's lying close to cuneate nucleus, just posterolateral to cuneate nucleus, receives more lateral fibers from the fasciculus cuneatus and gives rise to a different type of fibers known as posterior external arcuate fibers. Posterior external arcuate fibers, carrying proprioceptive fibers to cerebellum of same site through inferior cerebellar peduncle. So just remember, there is another accessory cuneate nucleus which carries fibers, the lateral fibers of fasciculus cuneatus. It's lying posterolateral to the main cuneate nucleus and carries proprioceptive fibers to the cerebellum, to the same side cerebellum through inferior cerebellar peduncle. Whereas the internal arcuate fibers will be, medial lemniscus will be going to thalamus. The posterior external arcuate fibers, they are going to the cerebellum, same side cerebellum through inferior cerebellar peduncle. The spinal nucleus and tract of trigeminal nerve can also be seen here. This is a new kind of nucleus appearing here, gray matter, and that is known as inferior olivary nucleus. Pyramid is also seen here. Pyramid is also seen here. So this thing has become permanent now. I think I should try to remove it later. It's like, okay. So now you have the central gray matter. This is central gray matter. Within the central gray matter, you can make out the hypoglossal nucleus, the dorsal nucleus of vagus, and the nucleus of tractus solitarius. Hypoglossal nucleus concerned with the 12th nerve. Dorsal nucleus of vagus concerned with the 10th nerve. Nucleus of tractus solitarius concerned with taste sensation. So what are all the nerve fibers concerned with taste, your facial nerve and all that, all these chorda tympani nerve, greater pituitary nerve, all these are carrying taste sensation. So all these will be finally coming in, relaying or synapsing here in this nucleus. The medial longitudinal bundle is what you see here. So if you go through this section, nucleus, I'm just recapping all the parts or features here. Nucleus gracilis, nucleus cuneatus, accessory cuneate nucleus, spinal nucleus, and tract of trigeminal nerve, inferior olivary nucleus, pyramid, the central gray matter with hypoglossal nucleus, dorsal nucleus of vagus, nucleus of tractus solitarius. And this is pyramid, this is your medial lemniscus, and this is your medial longitudinal bundle or medial longitudinal fasciculus. A new terminology you're listening to now, medial longitudinal bundle or medial longitudinal fasciculus. It's nothing but it's lying just behind the medial lemniscus. It's a compact bundle with large number of nerve fibers which connect 3rd, 4th, 6th, 8th cranial nerves and spinal nucleus of 11th cranial nerve. So now you might wonder why it is unnecessarily connecting the nerves which are innervating the extraocular muscles of eyeball, the nerve that is concerned with vestibulocochlear function, and the nerve, the spinal part of the accessory nerve, which is totally going to the neck and supplying two muscles. There's a beautiful reason here, you know. So when you keep walking on the road and suddenly somebody is calling out your name from behind, what do? You just shut your ears and keep walking in front? Okay, my friend is coming, I want to escape from him, I don't want to look at him, let me run away from here. Do you do that? No. We turn back and see who is calling out your name, isn't it? So when you hear your name being called, your neck turns, your eyeballs turn, they also turn to see who's calling you from behind. So this is a wonderful neuromuscular coordination between the motor contraction of the eyeball muscles, the neck muscles, in response to hearing. So now you will understand why all these are interconnected through this medial longitudinal bundle or fasciculus. So when somebody calls out to you from a distance, immediately your neck turns and your eyes also turn to see what's happening behind or who's calling you from behind. So your eyeball muscles innervation, your neck muscles, trapezius, sternocleidomastoid innervation, spinal nucleus of axillary nerve, in response to your auditory nerve, that is your vestibulocochlear nerve, your 8th nerve, will be interconnected, and that is exactly the function of medial longitudinal bundle. So next what comes is your spinocerebellar tract and spinothalamic tract. I'm not going deep into all these tracts. You have the spinocerebellar tracts here and the spinothalamic tract. The spinothalamic tract appears in the form of lateral and anterior spinothalamic tracts, and they are collectively called as spinal lemniscus. So far we are learning one by one lemniscus. This is spinal lemniscus, and the spinal tract of trigeminal nerve and spinal nucleus and spinal tract of trigeminal nerve will be called as trigeminal lemniscus. So this is trigeminal lemniscus because concerned with 5th cranial nerve, we call this as trigeminal lemniscus. Not now, in the next stage, when you go to the pons, It will form a lemniscus. Lemniscus is a band. Lemniscus is nothing but a band of nerve fibers or axonal fibers, which are going to carry some sensation to the higher centers of the thalamus and then to, the higher centers of the brain as well. So this is going to form the trigeminal lemniscus in the next level of brainstem in the pons. So what you see here will be the spinal lemniscus formed by the spinothalamic tract. We saw the medial lemniscus that is here formed by the internal arcuate fibers, and this is going to form in the next stage as trigeminal lemniscus. One more will come in pons, that will be your lateral lemniscus, which is concerned with hearing, your auditory function or hearing. So next we are moving on to the uppermost level of your medulla oblongata, that is inferior olivary nucleus level. So this is seen at the level of the floor of fourth ventricle. That's why I told you it is opening up. The central canal, which was like this, a closed canal, goes up and opens up like this. That is what you're seeing here. This open part only you're seeing here. So this is what exactly you're seeing here. So at the floor of the fourth ventricle, you find this level of inferior olivary nucleus when you take a transverse section of medulla oblongata. The central gray matter is spread over the floor of the fourth ventricle and contains all these nuclear masses. The hypoglossal nerve, you can see it emerging here like this. Dorsal nucleus of vagus, you can see the nerve emerging here like this. Pyramid is here, olive is there. We studied the external features that between the pyramid and the olive, hypoglossal nerve is emerging. Lateral to inferior olivary nucleus, you find the 9, 10, 11 cranial nerves emerging. That's exactly what's happening here. So in this gray matter area, you find hypoglossal nucleus, dorsal nucleus of vagus here. Nucleus intercalatus is not labeled here. It's a very small, inconspicuous nucleus. You can forget it. And you also find the vestibular nucleus here, concerned with the balance of the body, vestibular nucleus here. So nucleus of tractus solitari is also close by here, ventral to vestibular nucleus. Nucleus ambiguous is here in the reticular formation, which is going to give rise to motor fibers of your 9, 10, 11 cranial nerves. Glossopharyngeal, vagus, and cranial part of accessory. All these are going to have their motor fibers taking origin from nucleus ambiguous. Nucleus ambiguous situated within the reticular formation. So what are all the gray matter masses that we see here at the level of inferior olivary nucleus level? Hypoglossal nucleus, dorsal nucleus of vagus, nucleus intercalatus not marked here, vestibular nucleus, nucleus of tractus solitarius, and nucleus ambiguous giving rise to motor fibers of 9, 10, 11 cranial nerves. So on either side of midline, so that finishes the gray matter masses. Now this is a midline. On either side of midline, what all will you see? So you find the medial longitudinal bundle or medial longitudinal fascicle, which helps you to turn your head and eyeball and see what's happening behind you. Tectospinal tract, is again concerned with vision. We'll study it later. And this is medial lemniscus, we already talked about it, and pyramidal tract. So all these are seen one by one on either side of midline from behind to the anterior aspect in order, from behind forwards in order. So you have your medial longitudinal fasciculus, tectospinal tract, medial lemniscus, and pyramidal tract. Now arcuate nuclei will be known as your displaced pontine nuclei seen on the anteromedial aspect of pyramid. And some fibers arise from these arcuate nuclei known as anterior external arcuate fibers. We already studied something as posterior external arcuate fibers, and those fibers were arising from the accessory cuneate nucleus. If you remember, accessory, I'll give a recap now, going back to the picture. Accessory cuneate nucleus giving rise to fibers known as posterior external arcuate fibers. Posterior external arcuate fibers giving origin to posterior external arcuate fibers arising from accessory cuneate nucleus. So these fibers are known as anterior external arcuate fibers arising from the arcuate nuclei, which are nothing but displaced pontine nuclei. Pontine nuclei we see in the pons level. As the brainstem is coming down, narrowing, becoming narrow as a medulla, it gets displaced or dislodged as scattered nuclei. Pontine nuclei becomes scattered on the anteromedial aspect of the pyramid in the medulla to be called as your arcuate nuclei, and fibers arising from that will be known as anterior external arcuate fibers. So we've studied 3 arcuate fibers: internal arcuate fibers, posterior external arcuate. Internal arcuate fibers arising from nucleus gracilis, nucleus cuneatus. They run towards the midline, cross the midline, and ascend as medial lemniscus, carrying touch and proprioception from the opposite side of the body. So those fibers are internal arcuate fibers. Posterior external arcuate fibers are arising from accessory cuneate nucleus, and anterior external arcuate fibers are arising from arcuate nuclei, which are displaced pontine nuclei seen on the anteromedial aspect of pyramid. So moving on to inferior cerebellar peduncle, this region is your inferior cerebellar peduncle, which connects the medulla oblongata and the cerebellum. Then you have your inferior olivary nucleus. That's why this section is known as inferior olivary level. So inferior olivary nucleus is the largest mass of gray matter in medulla, very prominent, and it appears like a crumpled bag. We say Patiamma has, Aya has a surkupai, isn't it? You go to buy any kirai or green leafy vegetable or flowers from old ladies, old party or Aya on the platform. They'll be, if you give the money, they'll put into a small purse, crumpled purse, surkupai. We say surkupai in Tamil, isn't it? So that surkupai, exactly, that is what we mean by crumpled bag appearance. Of course, it's a fashion icon now. Having a bag of that kind is a fashion now. We have a lot of decorations done on it and we carry it for weddings and all. Of course, girls, of course. So that is a crumpled bag appearance. The appearance, how the inferior olivary nucleus looks like, and it has connections with the cerebellum of same side, helps to smoothen the motor functions of the cerebellum, or helps to smoothen further the functions of cerebellum. Cerebellum is supposed to make your motor activities very smooth and highly skilled, and inferior olivary nucleus further helps in that function of the cerebellum. And close to it will be lying your medial and lateral olivary nucleus, medial and dorsal accessory olivary nucleus. You can just ignore these. Just remember, inferior olivary nucleus is the main feature of this level, and it has connections with cerebellum to further smoothen the functions of cerebellum, having a crumpled bag appearance. So now moving on to, we are slowly winding up to the end of the session now. Blood supply of medulla. Blood supply is mainly by the branches of vertebral artery and the branches of basilar artery. So two vertebral arteries, anterior posterior spinal arteries, anterior inferior cerebellar artery, a branch from the basilar artery, posterior inferior cerebellar artery, a branch from the vertebral artery, and basilar artery itself. All these arteries will be supplying mainly vertebral artery and your pica, posterior inferior cerebellar artery. So you can see that here vertebral artery is supplying the area on either side of the midline, and posterior inferior cerebellar artery is the dorsolateral area, the area close to inferior cerebellar peduncle. So that area is supplied by pica. This is pica. Pica, ica. We call it as ica, pica. Ica is anterior inferior cerebellar artery. Pica is posterior inferior cerebellar artery. Okay, fine. So the area, the paramedian area, paramedian, just parallel to median plane. Paramedian area is supplied by vertebral artery, and the posterolateral area is supplied by pica, posterior inferior cerebellar artery, a branch of vertebral artery. The veins will be draining into occipital sinus. Of course, all the brain will be draining only into the sinuses, dural venous sinuses there. Dorsally into occipital sinus, ventrally into basilar plexus of veins, and finally into inferior patellar sinus. Inferior patellar sinus will be draining into internal jugular vein. Inferior patellar sinus, there's a very unique thing about it. It's the first tributary to be draining into the internal jugular vein. And the medullary veins will also communicate with the spinal veins. Now coming to the most important part of the session, cranial anatomy. The commonest cause for thrombosis, the commonest clinical condition is due to any thrombosis or hemorrhage involving posterior-inferior cerebellar artery and vertebral arteries, resulting in two types of syndromes known as lateral medullary syndrome and medial medullary syndrome, respectively. So you know from this picture itself, the area which is supplied by vertebral artery, if this area is affected by loss of blood supply, then this will be forming medial medullary syndrome because it is close to midline. If this dorsolateral area is going to be affected, supplied by pica, that will be called as lateral medullary syndrome. So this is medial medullary syndrome, and this is a lateral medullary syndrome, usually due to vascular reasons, vascular thrombosis. Okay. You can now slowly connect the first case that we saw, the clinical presentation that I showed you in my second slide, that you can connect now because I'm using the word vascular lesion, vascular thrombosis, uncontrolled hypertension, chronic, improperly treated hypertensive patient, that you can remember now. This lateral medullary syndrome is also otherwise known as Wallenberg syndrome, the person who found it out, or the person who diagnosed this condition for the first time. So lateral medullary syndrome, the artery that is involved here is spica, posterior-inferior cerebellar artery, a branch of vertebral artery, which can be thrombosed or which can go in for embolism. A blood clot can go clotted or can even rupture. So dorsolateral part of the medulla oblongata will be affected. The thrombosis affects a wedge-shaped area. A roughly triangular wedge-shaped area is affected on the dorsal aspect of medulla, and inferior cerebellar peduncle is also involved, resulting in the following signs and symptoms in the patient. So spinothalamic tract is involved. So because of that, you have contralateral loss of pain and temperature sensation in trunk and limbs, contralateral, opposite side. So because all these are cross tracks. So contralateral loss of pain and temperature sensation in trunk and limbs because spinothalamic tract is involved in Wallenberg syndrome or lateral medullary syndrome. Followed by spinal nucleus and tract of trigeminal nerve. So it doesn't cross. So ipsilateral loss of pain. I kept on telling you spinal nucleus and tract of trigeminal nerve concerned with carrying sensations from the face. So ipsilateral loss of sensation, loss of pain and temperature or loss of sensation from the face. Nucleus ambiguous. Nucleus ambiguous, I told you, nucleus ambiguous, you have the 9, 10, 11 cranial nerve motor fibers arising. So 9, 10, 11, 9 is glossopharyngeal supplying stylopharyngeus, and you have your vagus supplying the muscles of larynx to the rectolaryngeal nerve, extralaryngeal nerve, and you have cranial axillary supplying the muscles of palate. Your muscles of palate are being supplied by it, and pharynx is being supplied by it. So ipsilateral paralysis of palate, pharynx, and larynx, as I mentioned to you now. Nucleus ambiguous will be involved. Nucleus ambiguous will be involved. So you will have ipsilateral paralysis of muscles of palate, pharynx, and larynx. Inferior cerebellar peduncle also will be involved. So inferior cerebellar peduncle and cerebellum is very close by, will be involved, resulting in ipsilateral ataxia. Now, what do you mean by ataxia? Physiology is done. Ataxia is loss of balance of body. You sway like this, loss of balance of body. So that is known as ataxia. So inferior cerebellar peduncle and cerebellum, if involved, the patient will be having ipsilateral ataxia, loss of body balance. Giddiness can be there because vestibular nucleus can be involved. So giddiness also can be there. Then you have your reticular formation also can be involved in this region. So descending sympathetic pathway in reticular formation of medulla, it can result in Horner syndrome also. So I'll just go through all these symptoms once again. Spinothalamic tract, if it is involved, it will be involved. Spinothalamic tract will be involved, so there will be contralateral loss of sensation from the opposite side, body, trunk, and limbs. Spinal nucleus and tract of trigeminal nerve, there will be ipsilateral loss of sensation from face. Nucleus ambiguous, there will be ipsilateral paralysis of muscles of pharynx, larynx, and soft palate. Inferior cerebellar peduncle and cerebellum, there will be ataxia, ipsilateral ataxia, that is the loss of body balance. Giddiness because of involvement of vestibular nucleus. And Horner syndrome due to involvement of descending sympathetic pathway within the reticular formation in medulla. So this is about lateral medullary syndrome. Now what about medial medullary syndrome? Medial medullary syndrome is due to a thrombosis or hemorrhage of the paramedian area. So in the paramedian area, what are all the structures present here? So those structures will lose their function, obviously. So what you have a pen in your hand, you're writing, you're going on writing beautifully calligraphy. You're using a pen. Somebody snatches away a pen from you. What will happen? You cannot write. Of course, you can take another pen, but for the time being, immediate result or outcome will be you cannot proceed to write, isn't it? Exactly the same thing happens in all these lesions. What are the functions of each of those features affected in that particular area of the medulla? Those functions will be lost. So in the paramedian area, we have the hypoglossal nerve, we have the pyramidal tract is there, we have the medial lemniscus. The most three important things. All those functions will be lost now. This area is supplied by direct branches, medullary branches from vertebral arteries. So this pyramid, if it is involved, it will be resulting in contralateral hemiplegia or paralysis of opposite half of body, arm and leg. You would have known by now what is internal capsule lesion. So if pyramid is involved, you'll have opposite side paralysis of one half of the body. Hypoglossal nerve paralysis will be on the same side as a lesion. If it is right medulla thrombosed, then on the same side it will be affected. The right side of tongue muscles will go in for paralysis and atrophy. Ipsilateral paralysis and atrophy of tongue. Medial lemniscus, there'll be because again it's crossed fibers. Medial lemniscus, remember, interlacuate fibers from one side go and cross to the other side to ascend as medial lemniscus. So contralateral loss of position and vibration sense or proprioception. So these are three main symptoms that we find in medial medullary syndrome in the form of pyramid, hypoglossal nerve, and medial lemniscus being affected in medial medullary syndrome due to a thrombosis of vertebral artery. So pyramid, if affected, contralateral hemiplegia of the opposite half of the body, that is paralysis. Hypoglossal nerve, same side, ipsilateral paralysis and atrophy of tongue muscles, one half. Medial lemniscus, contralateral loss of position and vibration sense. So this is how the patient will look like. So you can make out this, if you see, this side is paralyzed, what is shown in stripes, colors. So his medulla on the left side will be affected. Medulla on the left side is affected. And same side, the tongue is deviated. Tongue is being pulled to one side. So that side tongue has no control. That side tongue is not functioning. The other side tongue muscles are acting normally and moving the tongue to the opposite side. The right side, in this patient, the left side tongue muscles are paralyzed because left side is a lesion, because right side is the contralateral hemiplegia. And all this will be your same side facial loss of sensation. All this spinal nucleus and trigeminal ipsilateral loss of sensation. All that is shown here, okay? So this is why you find the tongue being deviated to the same side. It is not problem on, it's not problem on the other side. It's actually the other side muscles are normal. Left medulla is having the problem. So left hypoglossal nerve is paralyzed. Left hypoglossal nerve is damaged. So left side tongue muscles are paralyzed. They cannot contract. So the other side tongue muscles are overacting and pushing the tongue to the affected side. So that's why the tongue is looking like this. Which side is affected? Medulla, it is actually the left side medulla affected, because looking at this contralateral hemiplegia, you can easily pinpoint that the left side medulla has gone in for thrombosis in this medial medullary syndrome. So since medulla contains vital centers, its injury is fatal. Injury to medulla is fatal. That's why you find in road traffic accidents, if the victim has a fracture, the back of the head or base of skull, then usually it's a lesion in the medulla, and because it has the vasomotor cardiorespiratory control centers there, and the patient can die on the spot. That's why usually patients die in RTA if they have a fracture at the back of the skull, the occipital region, where the head joins the neck, upper part of the neck or the base of skull, because medulla will be injured. Respiratory center is particularly vulnerable to compression and poliomyelitis, resulting in respiratory failure. Medulla resembles a bulb in shape. That's why any paralysis occurring due to a lesion in medulla or a problem in medulla, we call it as bulbar paralysis, which is characterized by paralysis of muscles supplied by cranial nerves emerging from medulla. Next year, when you go to medicine posting, you'll be hearing these terms very frequently: bulbar paralysis, bulbar paralysis, bulbar paralysis. Nothing but any lesion in the medulla, which results in paralysis of the muscles supplied by the nerves emerging from medulla. So which are the nerves emerging from medulla? Last four cranial nerves, 9, 10, 11, 12 cranial nerves. So if these cranial nerves are, these cranial nerves are going to be damaged, the muscles supplied by them also will be going in for paralysis, and that is what we call as bulbar paralysis. So you should know this term next year when you go to your, in another few months when you go to your medicine posting, if you're allowed to go to the hospital to see patients directly once all the corona settles down. So a person, we come back to the case now, a person following irregular medication for chronic high BP, all these are hinting factors for you. Irregular medication, he's not taking medicine properly to control his BP or regulate his BP. For a long time, he's been like this on high BP. So obviously such persons are prone to develop vascular thrombosis or hemorrhage. He was brought to the hospital with complaints of inability to move limbs on one side. Same side, there was no sensation. So inability, motor inability and sensory inability was on the same side. But the tongue problem was on the opposite side. So identify the lesion. It's a medial medullary syndrome. Very clear picture of medial medullary syndrome. What is the reason? We know it's a chronic uncontrolled high BP for a long time. What are the reasons for clinical presentation? This is again your inability to move limbs, contralateral hemiplegia, pyramid is out. Then sensation is not there, medial lemniscus is out. And your tongue muscle is deviated to same side as lesion. That's because of hypoglossal nerve damage or hypoglossal paralysis. So this is how we analyze. We saw the case in the beginning. We went through the entire session on medulla, and now you're able to analyze and find out the answers or solutions of this problem. So this is a problem-based learning. You saw the clinical presentation in the beginning. You went through the entire session. You were able to analyze and solve the answers for all these questions. So with this, we come to the end of today's session. The next session will be ponds. I will let you know the date. This week, I'm really busy with some webinars. Next week, I'll be doing ponds. So thank you. Thank you, all of you. Happy learning, all of you. So hope the session was useful for all of you. If possible, you can give your feedbacks through Shruti. I think Shruti is your classmate. So if possible, you can give your feedback to Shruti so that